Let's get started with our first news. What's next for Leon Edwards after his UFC loss? Today, let's dive into what's next for Leon Edwards after his devastating UFC loss. Edwards and his team may have been planning to retain the welterweight throne, but after what went down at UFC London, there are going to be some serious doubts about whether that will ever happen. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel. Now, let's talk about what happened in that fight. Edwards went up against Sean Brady in the main event, and as some analysts had predicted, Brady's wrestling and top game proved to be way too much for the former champion. From the opening bell, Brady came out pressuring Edwards, pushing the pace, and making it clear that he had a game plan to take Edwards down and control him. By the second round, it was obvious that it wasn't going to be Rocky's night. Brady's relentless pressure, his well-timed takedowns, and his ability to dominate on the ground started to wear on Edwards. Then, in the fourth round, Brady finished the deal with a tight guillotine choke, forcing Edwards to tap. It was a statement victory for Brady, who now moves one step closer to title contention. So, the big question now is, what's next for Edwards? On one hand, it might seem hasty to completely write him off as a top contender. After all, this is the same guy who defeated elite fighters like Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington not too long ago. However, this is now back-to-back losses for Edwards, and in both fights, his weakness on the ground has been exposed. Bilal Muhammad did the same thing to him last July when he ended Edwards' reign as welterweight champion with a dominant decision win. Another major factor to consider is Edwards' age. He will be turning 34 this summer, meaning that the clock is winding down on his prime years. So what will the UFC decide? Will they push Edwards into a gatekeeper role where he faces up-and-coming fighters looking to break into the top 5? Or will they give him a chance to rebound and work his way back into title contention? Could the UFC book him against the winner of the upcoming fight between Jeff Neal and Carlos Prates? That could be an interesting matchup. And what about Sean Brady? With a win like this, he's now in the title shot mix and could be just one fight away from a championship opportunity. So what do you think? Who should Leon Edwards fight next? And does Sean Brady deserve a title shot after this huge win? Let us know in the comments. Moving on to the second news. Arman Tsarukyan calls out UFC fighters. Arman Tsarukyan is still waiting to book his next fight, and it sounds like he's getting a bit frustrated. He was booked to fight Islam Makhachev at UFC 311 in January, but the #1 contender pulled out just hours before due to a reported back injury. Although the Armenian secured a title shot on account of going 9-1 since his initial fight with Islam, Dana White announced that Tsarukyan would not be fighting for the belt next. The belief is that the UFC wasn't too thrilled with Arman's withdrawal. Well, with April fast approaching, it's not clear when and who Tsarukyan will fight next, and recently, the 28-year-old took aim at his fellow contenders via social media. He posted this: "I'm the true #1 contender, ready to prove it against anyone, but how am I supposed to do that when everyone else just wants to fight on paper? Charles Justin. You can sit and wait, or you can step up and earn it. It'll be interesting to see who the UFC taps to face Arman next, since he and Gaethje have never fought, and because of each man's abilities, there's a lot to like about that fight. Of course, since all the drama at UFC 311 went down, Volkanovski has vacated the featherweight title and is moving up to lightweight. As a result, there's extensive speculation that the UFC is hoping to book Makhachev vs Topuria next, especially since both men are widely considered to be two of the best fighters in the world. So one would think it would generate a lot of interest. But while talking to KO Monero MMA recently, Charles Oliveira took a poke at that view. "I'm looking for a title, and today's champion is Islam Makhachev. Topuria is a very tough guy. He deserves all the respect in the world, but right now, I don't see it as a big fight. And if I'm looking for a title, well, I have to fight Makhachev in order to win and become a champion again." You can't fault Oliveira for wanting to lock up another fight with Makhachev, but chances are not too many people agree that Islam versus Ilia isn't a big fight. In fact, Topuria himself responded to Charles. "Charles, it's better if you stay quiet. You have 10 losses. 5 by knockout, 4 by submission, and 1 by decision. You are the contender, while I am the champion, the father of the entire division. I haven't come here to ask for anything. Here, I am the one in charge." What's your take on Dub Bronx's comments and the follow-up? Moving on to another news, Ilia's next UFC fight. It's been a little while since Ilia vacated the featherweight title, all in order to make a run at lightweight. But as the MMA world eagerly waits to see what's next for him, it looks like Dana White might have some big news around the corner. As we covered earlier, the general belief is that the UFC is driving hard to book a massive fight between Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. There have been rumors swirling that this potential all-star bout could go down as soon as this June, which would be one of the most anticipated matchups of the year. Well, recently Dana White sat down with TNT, and of course he was asked the big question, what's next for Ilia Topuria? Now, while the UFC CEO didn't exactly spill all the details, he did stop short of outright denying the possibility of the fight happening. Instead, he hinted that fans won't have to wait much longer for an official announcement. Here's what Dana had to say. We're still working on that. We're working on the plan for Ilia. We should have some announcements about him. Give us just a couple more weeks, and we'll have some concrete plans for him. But as of right now, that is true. He's vacating, he's moving up, and we'll figure out the rest in the next couple of weeks. Now, the fact that White is keeping things under wraps is definitely interesting. Could this mean that Topuria versus Makhachev is actually happening? Or is the UFC deliberately delaying an announcement because they're considering other opponents for both fighters? If the Islam versus Ilia fight doesn't happen next, then the big question is, who will Topuria fight instead? Could the UFC book him against a top contender in the lightweight division before giving him a title shot? Or is Topuria's star power too big right now for anything other than a championship fight? One thing is clear, Topuria's move to lightweight is official, and he's coming in with bad intentions. This is a guy who has dominated the featherweight division, and now he wants to do the same at 155 pounds. So what do you think? Did Dana's words tip his hand on whether Topuria will battle Makhachev next? Or could we see a different opponent for El Matador? Let us know in the comments below. Meanwhile, moving on to the next news. Joe Rogan says Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev is not happening. During Fight Companion, Joe Rogan made a bold statement that shook up the MMA community. He doesn't believe that the highly anticipated showdown between Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria is actually going to happen. Here's exactly what Rogan had to say. I don't think that's happening. I wonder what they're going to do with Topuria. I like Topuria versus Oliveira. Oliveira is so tall, so dangerous everywhere. Huge reach advantage. Those lightweights are really big. Islam's huge. Now, this is a pretty big claim coming from one of the most respected voices in MMA. Rogan has been following the fight game for decades, and he's seen how matchups are made behind the scenes. So if he's saying Makhachev vs Topuria isn't happening, then there could be something big going on behind the scenes that we don't know about yet. The idea of Topuria vs Oliveira is also very interesting. Charles Oliveira is an absolute monster in the octagon. His submissions, his striking, and his experience make him one of the most dangerous fighters in the lightweight division. Rogan points out that Oliveira's size and reach would be a big factor against Topuria, who is moving up from featherweight. So could the UFC actually book Topuria vs Oliveira instead of the title fight with Makhachev? It's definitely a possibility. Oliveira is still a top contender, and if he's not next in line for a title shot, a fight with Topuria could be the perfect #1 contender matchup. But let's not forget, Ilia Topuria has made it clear that he wants the belt. He vacated his featherweight title specifically to move up and challenge for lightweight gold. Would he really accept a fight with Oliveira instead of Makhachev? Or is the UFC trying to build up the fight by creating some uncertainty before officially announcing it? One thing is for sure, Topuria is ready for war no matter who he faces next. Whether it's Makhachev, Oliveira, or another top contender, El Matador is stepping into lightweight with bad intentions. So what do you think? Would you rather see Topuria versus Makhachev, or do you like the idea of Topuria vs Oliveira? Let us know in the comment section below. Moving on to the next news, Colby Covington predicts Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev. Moving on to another exciting story, Colby Covington and Tim Welch recently broke down the highly anticipated potential super fight between Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. While there's been a lot of hype and speculation about this fight, it seems that opinions are divided on how things could play out inside the octagon. According to Colby Covington, he believes that Topuria has the power and striking ability to pull off an upset against the lightweight champion, while Welch sees Makhachev's wrestling being the key factor in determining the outcome. One of the biggest concerns for Makhachev's fans is his first fight against Alexander Volkanovski. Despite having no wrestling background, Volkanovski was able to consistently get back to his feet after being taken down. At one point, he even ended up on top of Makhachev, raising questions about how dominant Islam's wrestling really is. Meanwhile, Topuria comes from a Greco-Roman wrestling background, which could potentially help him find success in grappling exchanges against Islam. Unlike Volkanovski, who had to rely on scrambling, Topuria actually has technical wrestling skills, which might make it much harder for Makhachev to hold him down. Covington also pointed out an interesting factor. His former teammate, Dustin Poirier, may have laid out a blueprint for beating Islam Makhachev. In their fight, Poirier had moments of success, showing that Makhachev isn't invincible. Covington believes that if Topuria follows a similar strategy and uses his striking effectively, he could pull off a major upset. At the same time, Welch disagrees, believing that Makhachev's takedowns will be the deciding factor in this fight. He broke down the potential matchup, explaining how Islam might be able to exploit Topuria's wide boxing stance. According to Welch, Topuria's stance is wide and he doesn't kick too much. That could make it easier for Islam to get in on a high crotch, take him down, and put him in half guard. If that happens, it's going to be a long night for Topuria. Ultimately, the big question is whether Makhachev will be able to secure takedowns consistently, or if Topuria will be slippery enough to escape. Yesterday, UFC President Dana White also spoke on Topuria's future, confirming that big news about the Georgian fighter will be announced in the coming weeks. Could this mean Islam versus Topuria is happening soon? Who do you think wins this fight? Let us know in the comments below. Finally, let's wrap it up with our last story. Khamzat Chimaev gets into a street fight in London. In a recent interview, undefeated middleweight Khamzat Chimaev dropped some wild news that has the MMA world buzzing. Just a couple of days ago, Chimaev revealed that he was involved in a street altercation while in London. Now, we all know that Chimaev is one of the scariest and most feared fighters in the UFC, but even outside of the octagon, it seems like trouble just finds him. According to Chimaev, the situation started when he was approached by a stranger. At first, Khamzat thought it was just a regular fan, someone looking to shake his hand or take a photo, but things took a turn when the man suddenly started provoking him. Here's what Chimaev had to say about the incident. One thing led to another, and he was laying on the ground. Police took me in for questioning, and I spent hours in the station, so things like this can happen sometimes. That is absolutely insane. While Chimaev didn't go into too much detail about how exactly things escalated, it's clear that the other guy must have made a huge mistake by messing with boars. I mean, we're talking about a world-class wrestler with insane power. This guy smashes UFC fighters for a living. The fact that Chimaev was taken in for questioning suggests that the authorities took this situation very seriously, but as of now, there's no indication that Chimaev is facing any legal trouble over the incident. It looks like it was just a heated moment that ended with police intervention, but the real question is, who was this guy? Was he just a drunk fan looking to mess with a fighter, or was he someone who knew exactly who Chimaev was and still decided to push his luck? Either way, it didn't end well for him. This is just the latest chapter in the wild life of Khamzat Chimaev. Whether it's inside the UFC octagon or out on the streets, it seems like Boars is always ready for a fight. What do you think about this crazy situation? Was Chimaev just defending himself, or do you think he should be more careful about engaging in situations like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.